name's Charles Connor, and I'll be the Speakers Officer for the term ahead. And I'm actually very excited about that term, and I hope you are too. From Caitlyn Jenner and Anthony Scaramucci to two Game of Thrones superstars, two Prime Ministers, and Sir Ian McKellen, we have a real range of events coming up for you, and I can promise more flooding in every day. And of course, this is our open period, which ends on Wednesday, and up until that point, you can come to the debate, which is on Tuesday night, and also to hear Simon Sharma on Tuesday as well, and Chelsea Handler on Wednesday. So without further ado, let me introduce today's speaker. Mr. Boris Becker is, without question, a tennis legend. He has won 6 Grand Slams, including 3 Wimbledons. Indeed, in 1985, he became the youngest man ever to win Wimbledon at the age of 17. Since retiring in 1999, he has become an acclaimed commentator and has coached the likes of Novak Djokovic. I've talked for long enough. Can we all welcome Boris? So I suppose it'd be good to start with your thoughts on men's tennis at the moment. So who do you think the best is? And this can be both male and female, of course.
Well, before I'm going to answer you that question, let me say I am very happy and thrilled to be welcomed here by the union to speak in front of the future of our country. The reason we had a bit of a delay wasn't the M25. I thought it was pretty correct. The lunch took a bit longer than anticipated. and my wife had the Sunday roast, and her pork belly, she couldn't finish it. Therefore, we had to, it was a 10-minute delay. But coming back to your question, what was it again?
So it was sort of looking at the state of men's tennis and female tennis at the moment. So who do you think the best is? Because obviously we've got Federer and Nadal, Djokovic waiting in the wings, Murray always there.
Well, we're living in glorious times in men's tennis in particular. You mentioned Federer and Nadal, 2 of the all-time greatest of all time. And it's really unfortunate for everybody else that plays in the same era because, we have an Andy Murray here, you have Novak Djokovic here, so many others, but it's because those two are so good, they're taking away so many titles amongst the two, it's very difficult for everybody else. Now, Federer is the current Wimbledon champion, 36 years young, and Nadal is the current number 1, 31.5 years young. And you can argue they are so good, or you can make the argument the rest isn't as good. Because if you want to compare generations, which is always a difficult thing to do, in the 80s, or let's start with the 70s. I picked up a tennis racket because a guy from Sweden called Borg kept on winning Wimbledon. And young Boris in West Germany at the time, I was fascinated with his historic, way of winning the most important tournament year after year from the baseline. His opponent the last couple of years was John McEnroe. So I wouldn't really say these two players were bad, because if you say nowadays they are the best players of all time, you would call these players bad. And even before that, in the 60s, you had a guy called Rod Laver from Australia who won 2 Grand Slams, meaning 2 times all the 4 majors in 1 year. Again, you can say it was a different era, but you couldn't call him possibly that he was a bad tennis player. But I give credit where credit is due. Roger and Rafa, as we like to call them, because we know them so well, they're amazing. They're true ambassadors for our game. They're 2 of the most important popular sportsmen of all time. I mean, you can compare them with the best footballers, the best Formula 1 drivers and boxers. When Roger and Rafa go anywhere, thousands of people go with them. I mean, it goes to the point where their practices are televised live on Facebook, not their matches, but their practices. So then sometimes you get 5, 7, 10,000 people, just people watching them practice. So that's the fame and glory these players have achieved.
Yeah.
Now on the women's side, it's a bit different because we have a new number 1 on Monday, a Romanian girl called Simona Halep. They had 4 different number 1s on the women's side this year. That's mainly because superwoman Serena Williams, as I'd like to call her, she just had her first baby girl this past September, and she was a dominant player for the last 10 years. and any era needs a rivalry. You need, two great players. They feed off each other, and the crowd can get behind. At the moment, on the women's side, you have too many good players, and having a good couple of tournaments, good couple of months, and taking over the number one spot. I think it's important from the women's side to have one clear, strong number one that everybody can appreciate a bit more. Let me get some water.
That's fine. But so obviously you've talked about the best players and who are best in the field. Who do you sort of like to watch the most? So that might be a little bit different. I mean, you're a commentator. Who do you get excited about seeing when you look at your schedule for that day, and you're going to go and watch that person's match? Who excites you?
Well, as a commentator, tennis expert, I have to be neutral, but usually on the commentary it comes out which player I root for. Yeah. I'd like to keep it low, but usually I give it away quickly. I really like to commentate on Federer and Nadal because of their history to the game, and their greatness. And you can go for hours and hours about their quality on the other side. I like to see the younger players, the younger generations, come closer to them a little bit more. I'm talking about Zverev, Kyrgios. There are few players, and we just talked beforehand about the tennis tours in Asia right now. In China, there was a China Open, and Nadal beat Kyrgios 6-1, 6-2. For anybody that cares now, Nadal is 31 and Kyrgios is 22. So I got the feeling the 22-year-old got tired in the final, not the 31-year-old. That's something wrong with that, and that's what I'd like to emphasize on it is that. You said that I won a couple of Wimbledons. Well, I was 17 years old, 18 years old, but I wasn't the youngest because you had the likes of Michael Chang, Jim Courier, others that won other Grand Slams when they were teenagers. Now, when you're 22, 23, you're still called young. I don't really buy that. I think it's an alibi. I think it's an excuse, and it's giving too much advantage to Roger and Rafa because at 22 you shouldn't be tied on a Sunday final.
Yeah, and I mean, do you think that is the big challenge facing tennis at the moment, getting that replacement through for those, I suppose, the big four, but really the big two on the men's side? Do you think that's the challenge? And do you think Zverev and as you said, all of these other players coming through, do you think they have it in them to drive forward into the next generation?
Well, that's the big question, and you're absolutely right mentioning the big four. That's Murray and Djokovic. They're injured right now, and therefore they can't play at the moment. But they definitely have won a lot of Grand Slams and been number one the last 10 years as well. So those big four have dominated the game now 12, 14 years. And the question is, who can take over? As I said, on the women's side, on the men's side too, you need a strong number one. You need a strong number two. Are these players that I mentioned, are they good enough? Do they want the responsibility? Can they carry the game into, for the next 5 or 10 years? And I wonder sometimes whether that's too much responsibility and too much pressure, and I wonder whether that's the reason they're not better, because they sort of go, I'm okay that Roger and Rafa is in front of me. I'm happy being 3 or 4 in the world. So ultimately, these two will stop playing, and they will find out the truth.
Yeah. And just sort of moving on a bit about yourself. So you've obviously played, you've coached. If you could coach any player in the world at the moment, who would you pick, and who do you think you could make that impact on? Would you go back, for example, to Novak, or do you think that you could step in and really transform somebody else's game, really drive them up onto that new plane?
Just to give you a backstory how the relationship between Djokovic and me happened. It's now 4 years ago when he lost his number one ranking to Rafael Nadal, and I was in Johannesburg on a conference, and his agent called me. These guys, they don't call anybody anymore. They have their agents do all this, right? So they don't have a phone, and it's the agent calling me, and he says, "Would you be interested in coaching Novak?" And I said, "Well, thank you for the flowers. Thank you very much. Why? He's number 2 in the world." And then they go, "Well, that's the problem." Yeah. I say, "I get it. Okay." So I said, "Well, it would be an honor for me to meet Novak and discuss tennis." So I met him the weekend after Monte Carlo, and then we you like tennis, so you should have been a fly on the wall, because we really talked tennis. We talked about a tennis match is not decided at the match point. The tennis match, the big matches are decided in 1 or 2 points that have nothing to do with the match point. The match point is the result of the other 50 points you played. And then, I commentated, obviously, some of his losses, so I went over and I said, listen, at 3, 4, 15, 30, that backhand slice down the line, why did you play that? And then he said, well, why did you pick it up? And I said, well, I was on the same position 20 years ago. I knew exactly that point changed the whole momentum of the match. And then he really, got it that I am older, but I'm still, my eyes are still good, and I can still see and read a tennis match. But ultimately, the question I had for him is, the question I have for everybody that plays is, how bad do you want it? Yeah. What are you willing to sacrifice to get back to number one? And then he said everything. And I said, that's a big word. What do you mean with everything? And then we discussed what it means. He's a family man. He's got a lovely wife. They had their second child in September. And I said, well, tennis has to be number one, family two. I hate to say it, but that's the way it is. Otherwise, we stay friends, but I can't coach you. For me, the reason to go to Melbourne is to win Melbourne. Not to look good and not to go to the semi-final, but to win Melbourne. And after 3 months of a trial period, we realized that we have the same goal. And then we had three successful years, and it's very symbolic that last fall when we had the meeting of do you want to continue? And I said, well, I get the feeling that your family life is again more important to you. And he said, that's correct, Boris. A year later, they're having a second baby. So I think he's very good at what he does. Yeah. He's very he's a very true professional. Yeah. If he wants to win, he does what he has to do. Yeah.
So do you think that's the difference between the sort of the very good and the best, is that sort of mental side?
I think that's the big difference. I think that's a difference not only in sport but in business as well. How bad do you want it? What you're willing to do to get the deal done, to get the match point, and so forth. And by the way, as I recollect, I think Mrs. Murray is expecting their second baby as well this December. I mean, these guys time it unbelievably. They have an injury, and then they take 6 months off, and the next thing you know is they're having another baby. So this is a very they're true professional. And it's a mindset. Some things you learn on the practice court, some things you learn in the rehearsals, some things you learn with your teachers. But ultimately, the most important things you only learn it in the middle of the action, whatever that is. Yeah. So some things you just can't rehearse, and in sports in particular, it's a life game. You only have in football you have 95 minutes. In tennis you have 2, 3, 4, 5 sets. So you don't know what the opposition does. So you have very quickly react to the opposition, and that's something you can't practice. Right. You have to sort of go into the fight and see what happens.
And did that, I suppose, considering it is an individual game, did that at any points get lonely during your career, having to be you against that person beyond the net and putting everything away in order to be the best you could be? Were there tough points there?
Very much. I mean, in tennis players' case, I think the toughest opponent is always the man in the mirror, yourself, because everybody has to defeat their demons. We are weak. We're not perfect. We have moments of despair. We have moments where we can't perform the way we want to for all sorts of reasons, and then you have to overcome that. And so the biggest challenge is always against yourself. Yeah. And a tennis player's life is on the road. Sometimes I joke with my wife and my friends is the road is my middle name. Is what we do. Yeah. That's not for everybody. People are homesick. People want to be with their friends and families back home, and I understand that. But then you can't be a tennis player. Yeah. And there's a nice community amongst the tennis players. They all get along. We're in the same business. Yes, maybe Federer and Nadal and Djokovic and Murray wouldn't have dinner every night. No, they wouldn't. But I think with all the others, there's a good chemistry amongst all players because we're in the same thing together. Yeah, that helps.
And because that's a very particular type of mentality. So, was there any point when you realised that you could do this, that you were going to be a professional sportsman, that you had that sort of toughness which would make you capable of winning that? Because obviously you did win at 17. So when did you think, hey, I'm going to be that tennis player? I can win slams. I can win majors. I don't know.
I'd answer it. The innocence is wasted on the youth. I didn't know what I was doing at 16 or at 17. You just go with the flow. You're happy to get out of home. You're happy that you don't have to come back at 9 because your mother wants you to be in bed. So I took all opportunities that I got, and my tool was my tennis racket. Was my game. And when I stopped school for 2 years at 16, it was something my parents didn't want me to do. They wanted me, have the education, go to university. Heidelberg has a very famous university, as you all may know. And so go the same route as my sister, who was 4 years older. So all the greatest agents of the world had to come to Leimen, which is a little town in West Germany. And there's a lady that had the same school teacher in our first grade, Mrs. Bunze, which I couldn't believe. That was 40-some years ago. Can you believe that? Yeah. So my tool was tennis, and my parents had to be convinced more than once, and not with money, that I was one of the best tennis players at 16, and should give it a try for 2 years. In case it didn't happen, I could always go back and finish my studies. So I knew I had to hurry up winning. If I wasn't going to be winning, then I had to go back to school, and so I think that's one of the reasons I did win at 17, because that was an argument. Having said that, so after the first year out of school, I had to go back to the school principal. I forgot his name, maybe on purpose, to have a discussion with him, because he wanted me back into school. Came to school, and thousands of fans outside, and television cameras, and just everybody going crazy. But maybe that has eluded him. Maybe he's not a tennis fan. I didn't watch tennis. So we had a 45-minute interview where he was trying to convince me to go back to school. I just won Wimbledon a couple of weeks before. So I said, sir, and this and that, and at the moment it's going not so bad. I won this tournament in England, and just give me another year, and I'm sure I'm going to make it, and all this. And he said, fine, okay, I give you another year. Now, the following year, I won it again, but he didn't ask me back then. He didn't. I think he got the message. He got the message.
And was it always tennis? Because sometimes you hear about these people who have that hand-eye coordination and were good at about 3 or 4 different sports, and then had to pick. Or did you always know from when you picked up a tennis racket that was going to be your thing? Or football?
No, I mean, I have a good hand, good eyes, good hand-eye coordination. So football, basketball, everything with the ball, I'm pretty good at. I just always felt that in tennis, the responsibility was on me. Okay. I could be the greatest scorer. If we have a bad goalkeeper, we always lose 3-2. Yeah. And I always felt that if I'm playing my best, if I give it everything I have, I want to be able to win. And I felt in team sports, I would rely on my teammates, which is wonderful if you win. But if you're the type of character that I am, I think it's more difficult to swallow the pill. When you're losing, it wasn't your fault, because your teammates, they had a bad day. But having said that, I love team competition. In tennis, we have Davis Cup. We have team competitions that I love playing. But I think ultimately the reason that I was more fond of tennis was it was more on my shoulders.
Yeah, and you mentioned, sort of moving on to a different point, but something which you have brought up about the media, and when you turned up at the age of 19 at your school and you saw all those cameras pointing in your direction. Do you think the media's changed? Do you think it's become better? Do you think it's become more intrusive? Do you think it represents people fairly?
I think we'll all live in a time where we're in the middle of media. You can call it social media, you can call it conservative media, you can call whatever you want to call it. Ultimately, it's part of having the freedom of speech, which I find very, very important. It's just that some people take it the wrong way or take advantage of it. And I think the internet was one of the greatest creations ever. But obviously, a lot of people abuse it and use it the wrong way. So with everything good, there's something negative. There's something bad to it. And I'm in the middle of it. There are a lot of stories every week worldwide about me and this and that. And unless you really speak to the person, you don't know. I mean, I get many times a week. I'm somewhere, and I'm having this person look at me, a bit of staring at me, and then come to me and tries to have a conversation. And then I go, excuse me, well, I we don't know each other, and I don't know you, but I know you.
Yeah.
And I go, oh, really? Yes, I know everything about you. Wow. So where do we start? And then after a few minutes, he realizes he's offending me, he's disrespecting my privacy, and therefore, and he didn't mean bad. Yeah. He was a fan, he wanted to show his respect, but that's how powerful the media is, that they make you think that this is true or this is not true and so forth, and it's very, very dangerous, because when you're on the other end of the stick, you get often criticized for something you actually haven't done, or you get compliments for something you haven't done either. It goes both ways. So it's and then there are world affairs when, depending which network you watch, you get the opposite truth. We live in a world where the color of your skin and the God you believe in is becoming more and more important, and depending on the network that represents that, you're getting a fraction of the truth. And that's why we have all these misunderstandings in the world, because everybody wants to believe what they want to believe, what fits in their head or in their heart, and it's always dangerous to just say, nobody knows everything, that we all know a little bit, and in order to make a real assumption of anything, you have to get a much wider perspective of what's really happening. And coming back to the media, we live it, we're part of it, it's important. But in order to get a full idea of what you're reading about, you have to get a lot more facts.
Yeah, and I mean, having that exposure at the age of 17, just to go back to that, how was that like, going from being somebody who'd been in Lyman, been at school, and then suddenly just thrust into the limelight?
First of all, in 1985, there was no internet and no social media, okay? That's when we start. So in a way, it was easier, because I couldn't get carried away with all the compliments that I would have received. Yeah. Then my English to the and we had a very good English teacher in school, but I wasn't one of his best students, so my English was very limited. So for me to read the Times or the Telegraph in the morning was hopeless, because I wasn't, I liked the pictures, but the English was very limited. So, but English was the first language in tennis. Therefore, very quickly you have to pick it up, because they give press conferences in English and you speak with your colleagues in English. So, I think it was easier because of that. You were more sheltered from world's affairs. You were more sheltered about people talking about you. I think that's one of the reasons top tennis players develop later, I believe, because sometimes they can't believe their own hype. Or sometimes they can't believe how much expectations are on them on the next tournament, in the next final. So yeah, everything has both sides.
And we'll have a few final questions for me, and then we'll open out onto the audience. So audience, get ready with your questions. A little bit more about your career. So who do you think was the best player you ever faced? I know it would depend on surface, but who was your toughest opponent and why?
No, I was fortunate that I played with a number of really good players. Starting from John McEnroe, Jimmy Connors, Ivan Lendl, Mats Wilander, the whole Swedish gang, Stefan Edberg, they were amazing. Up to American came back, Sampras, Agassi, Courier, Chang, they were all number ones as well. To at the end, Federer. So over 15, 17 years, I was able to play with the best, and it's very difficult to say who was the best, because you're absolutely right. Depends on the surface, depends on so many things. But the best I played at Wimbledon, it was Pete Sampras. And when I felt that on my very best day I can't beat him, it was time for me to stop. So in 1997, when I lost to him in the semi-final, in straight sets, I felt that I didn't have a chance, and I thought I was playing well. I told him at the net that this was going to be my last Wimbledon. Little did I know that the whole center court was mic'd up, of course. So I came back into the locker room. Everybody looked, wow, what did you say? What did you do? And I said, what do you mean? Well, we all heard it. You told Pete that you're retiring from tennis. So times have changed.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, so obviously there's a film coming out, Borg versus McEnroe. Who do you think would play you in a film of your life? Who would you want to have playing you?
I'm good friends with Borg and McEnroe, and my wife and myself had a beautiful lunch this summer with Bjorn, and we talked about the film. And he said, well, but John, in his Swedish drawl, John doesn't like it so much because it was a Swedish producer and it really made me look good and it made him look awful. So when we had dinner with John in September in New York, and he said exactly the same, fucking Swedish, and so our opinion is, I think we want to watch the movie because I think two of the greatest players of all time, and they had an incredible rivalry. Their Wimbledon finals, everybody remembers, and they couldn't be more different to one another. So hopefully the movie is a success. And to answer your question, with actors, I'm a bit of an oldie fan, so I like the older actors a bit more than some of the up-and-comings. So just from his looks and the way that I think he was acting, quick answer would be a Steve McQueen. Because I did have shorter hair and the beard and all that, so I find that just as a quick answer. But obviously he's dead, so he can't.
And on that note, I'd like to thank Boris for having a chat with me, and I'd like to open to the audience. So if you've got any questions, please put your hand up and we'll get on to you quickly. So I'm going to take one from that woman over there.
Let me get up so you see me better.
I have two questions. Number one, how do you use...
Why isn't it that women always have two questions and men have one question? Why is it always the same thing? Please.
How do you use the knowledge of tennis in poker? And number two, do you have any favorite dance? And if you have, why
Third question.
and what?
So, tennis was for me a great live learner. I learned a lot of things that I use in the rest of my life very well. I got to understand who I am, my strengths and my weaknesses. If I function under pressure, how do I function under pressure? What do I need to get, to prepare myself? As a tennis player, you have to read the other person very quickly. So coming back to poker, I can read you, what you think, most of the time. And that helps in all areas of life. Is if you start to understand where the other side is coming from. So as a tennis player, that's very, very important because you have to anticipate. Anticipate means you don't know, but you anticipate. You sort of have a feeling, and also to believe in my own gut. I want to use my instincts, and because the instincts never lie. You just don't lie to you. And to make the right decisions based on the gut feeling and the instincts. And the third question? My favorite dance? Boy, I don't know. Lily, what is my favorite dance? I don't know. As long as I can dance with you, that's my favorite dance.
Aww. Aww. Any other? Oh, it's good. We've got such a range. Can I ask that person down there in the second row? Yeah, thanks, Zoe.
I last saw you play live way back in 1999 on the old court number 2 at Wimbledon in a thrilling 5-set match against Miles McLagan of England. Do you remember
Did you say 1899 or 1999?
Try 1999. And that was the year your last year at Wimbledon and the year that you subsequently retired. Why did you make that comeback, having said in 1987 that, to Sampras, that it was your last Wimbledon? And how easy or how difficult was it for you to let go of Wimbledon in '99?
That's a very good question, well observed. Having become a professional at 16 years of age, it was the best job in the world. Not having to answer to nobody, making a good living, having success, being independent, young and free. So in order to find something like that, it's difficult, it's almost impossible. So I call this my greatest addiction. So when I retired in '97, I was still an addict, a tennis addict, and I decided to play smaller tournaments to get rid of the drug. But I felt the smaller tournaments just wasn't giving me any kicks. So after a year of going to places, they throw a lot of money at you and you go and then you play 2 or 3 matches, but you don't really feel it anymore. I felt in order for me to close that chapter, I have to go to where it all started. So then at Christmas time in 1998, I announced, so this coming summer I will play 1 more Wimbledon, but that will be my last match. And in order to close the book, and that's exactly what happened. Exactly, I just wanted to finish the book of where it started, and that's where it was supposed to end. Yeah.
Perfect. Any more questions at all? Yes, that lady in the third row there.
Could 17-year-old you beat Federer or Nadal now?
You want an honest answer, or you want? No, I always felt that Wimbledon, on my best day, there was only one player that could beat me. That was Sampras. Federer isn't bad either, huh? He's won now his 8th Wimbledon, so that would be probably one match too many for me. But against Nadal, I would have liked my chances on grass. Having said that, I would not have wanted to play him on clay.
Anyone at all from this side? Yeah, the guy at the back with the England shirt.
Hi. Andre Agassi has spoken quite sort of candidly about hating tennis throughout his career. I was wondering, first of all, do you actually believe he did? Because he's now come back into coaching, and it was such a big part of his life. And then second of all, do you see any parallels with Kyrgios right now, claiming he's disillusioned with the game, and whether, perhaps like Agassi, if Agassi really did hate it, he can overcome these problems and become a great?
Well, first of all, he wrote a book that was called Open. And he touched on subjects, on his personal life, on the issues he's had. That was incredibly open. And I was surprised, everybody was surprised about that. And he did have a part about me that was, not filled of most compliments, but that's fine. I've beaten him a few times as well. So, depends where he was coming from. His father was a boxer. His father made him play tennis at days when he didn't want to play tennis. And he was a 12-year-old, a 14-year-old. I saw him first time when he was 15, 16. So I think the beginning was difficult for him. There's so much more respect to him how he finished. And if it wasn't a love affair, he would have not played 16, 17 years when he was able to choose. So I think everything he has today is because of tennis. And you would ask him today, he would say the same thing. Having said that, he's now coaching Novak. And when I first saw him at the French Open this year, we gave each other a long hug. And we call each other friends now because we are 10 years older, we're 15 years older. Life plays its own tricks, and eventually you get the message. So, but I was fortunate that I wasn't forced to play tennis. And you can see in the players of today, and also on the women's side, is that they don't really enjoy competing or playing the sport. They're playing because they have to pay, or they have to pay somebody else's paycheck. There are a lot of reasons why players playing these days. So just a quick answer to your question. I think he started the wrong way, but I think he finished the right way.
Perfect. Yes, the person in the front row there.
Yeah, if you could change the rules of tennis in any way, if you're given the power to change the rules, would you make any changes? For example, sudden death juice, first serves only, any particular... John McEnroe's spoken a lot about this. He would make a number of changes. Would you make any changes?
He was also coming out with the book, I believe, right? He was promoting his book, and so you do say things when the day is long. I like tennis rules. Of course, you could tweak here and there a little bit. I don't think we have a problem of fans. Tennis is more popular now than it's ever been. So something must be right about the sport. What I would change is scheduling. I think we have way too many so-called important tournaments. And I think that's where the players struggle and they get injured, and Andy's not playing at the moment, and Novak, is because everybody wants them every week, and sometimes they have to say no, or their body tells them. So I think I would change the amount of tournaments that they should play. I think that would be a great start. For a tennis player, especially a top tennis player, the ranking is our Bible. For us, it's important on every Monday, 10 o'clock, where are we? Because the ranking defines us. And the players will play where they get the most points, so they better their ranking. Or then for the following year to defend the points they've made. So it depends how many points you give certain tournaments, player would play or would not play. So I think that's where you start to change is less tournaments, more points maybe for the majors, or we have 9 Master Series. They're equally as important. So, but I would change the scheduling and not so much the rule as such.
Just a quick point. If you are streaming us on the live stream and you want to ask a question, please do tweet us. I've got my iPad here, and I'll make sure to ask some of those questions. So just tweet us at the Cambridge Union. Good. Can I ask? Yes, that woman down there in the green.
Well, they've done an excellent job, because every Grand Slam has equal pay. And it all started with a legend, and one of the most important sportswomen of all time. Her name is Billie Jean King. Because she, in the late 60s, and there's also a movie coming out, when she was playing, it's called The Battle of the Sexes, when he's playing against Bobby Riggs, who was the best tennis player. She was every women player today should give Billie Jean 5% of the prize money, because she created this. They used to play for free. So she fought the hell and back, and she's still very much alive. And just a few weeks ago in New York, where because of her understanding and explaining that it's the same job, it's the same work, therefore same pay, it got through. Now the opposition says, in a Grand Slam where there's equal pay, a male player has to play 3 out of 5 sets. The match lasting 3, 4, 5 hours, and then he has to do that 7 times. The women's final on the women's side lasted 65 minutes. The semi-final is not much longer. So they go, well, it's half the time. If they were the same, they should also play 3 out of 5. Then it would be correct. Now, I personally think there's enough money in tennis. And to stop the discussion is, of course, there should be equal pay, because fans like to see the women, they like to see us. In a Grand Slam, you have man, women is the best day of tennis. Of course, it should be done. But there are 2 sides to the coin.
Can I get this guy just down here, please?
Do you sometimes wish that you had won Wimbledon later? That you could have enjoyed your victory more if you were older and more mature?
I think I would have become a better tennis player because after winning at 17, every tournament I played, it was judged against that performance. So I was less creative, I was less risky, I was trying to repeat what I've done. And on a personal level, I would have been more mature when fame hit me, when fame and fortune hit me. At 17 and 18, you have no idea who you are, let alone explaining it to the world. So, some of the interviews I did at 17, I mean, I still don't know why I would have been asked about the World's Affair at 17, but that's the world we lived in then. So, probably for my evolution and education and well-being, winning Wimbledon later would have been better.
Yeah, at the back there. Can I get a microphone, Amy? So, yeah, it was just coming to you. Perfect. Good.
Here we go.
You mentioned a few minutes ago that tennis is the most popular it's ever been at the moment. Do you think that the popularity of the game may suffer when the likes of Roger, Rafa retire? I mean, hopefully not for a few years yet, but it's going to happen soonish.
Absolutely, and I'm afraid so. That's why the ATP is trying to promote the young stars a lot more. I think everybody's realizing that the Roger Rafa show eventually will stop, and then who's going to be the next one? And I think there will be a dip in popularity. There will be a dip in fame and importance before eventually somebody will take over. But this day will come, and we have to be prepared for it.
Perfect. In the second row there. Yes.
Hello. The game evolved quite seriously over the last 20 years. The physicality, the speed, it's become the bruising ground strokes. What elements do you think will continue to evolve the most over the next 10 to 15 years in tennis?
That's absolutely true. I think the big difference to my playing days than now is that it's gotten more physical. Having said that, that doesn't mean it's gotten better. I miss a little bit the days where I saw more variety, more technique, a backhand slice, serve and volley, a baseline against a serve and volley player. Now most players play very similar. One of the reasons why Rafa and Andy and Novak, the three greatest players from the baseline, are winning because they're just a little bit better, and everybody wants to do what they do, but they're better. I hope players realize that, and Roger's leading the way, that playing offensive tennis, playing a bit more slice, coming in, you can also win. In fact, you can win easier and quicker if you do it well. And I think that'll be the wake-up call for everybody. You saw the US Open final, maybe, where Kevin Anderson, at 31, the first time Grand Slam finalist, reached that final with serve volley. You saw at Wimbledon. You have Cilic, again, a very aggressive player. So there's room for improvement, but it needs the right coaches. They need to understand that tennis is so much more than what we see now. But obviously, Roger was asked the same question. He was asked at Wimbledon after he won, why do you think you're still so much on top? And then he said something interesting. He said, because everybody that's younger doesn't want to improve. They want to play the same. And because they play the same, I know what they're playing, therefore I'm better. I thought that was an honest moment that I haven't heard from him in a long time. He can afford it, 19 Grand Slam wins later, right? So he can talk about that. But that's exactly the truth.
Yeah. Any more questions? Yes, so back there on the left-hand side.
What do you think of John McEnroe's comments that Serena Williams would struggle to be in the top 700 on the men's circuit?
Let me start by saying that John was one of my biggest enemies on the tennis court. We really beat each other up, you know, with the racket and the language we use, believe me. I wasn't that good in English at 18, but after I played with John, my English improved rapidly. I learned words that I've never heard in my life before. So. We became close friends. And we have a tradition, you know, with my wife that every year Wimbledon comes and he comes with his wife and we have dinner at home and the same goes for New York. We really speak honestly about our lives and our kids and so forth. And Serena is the first person that would say, she didn't say 700, she said 500. I wouldn't be good enough at my best that I could compete with anybody in the top 500. Now, that's not something for John to say, it's something for Serena to admit. It's you know, it doesn't really need an explanation. The timing was a bit off, because she was just expecting her first baby. So, again, you know, just to take him cover a little bit, he was promoting his book and he needed a bit of a story, so people realized that he wanted to sell a book. But the truth is that, you know, the women's game and the men's game is very different. Different power, different speed, different characters, different personalities. You shouldn't compare it. And I think that's maybe the right answer.
Okay. Just time for a few more questions. So down here. That's okay.
So you talked about all the sacrifices you made, the life on the road. Do you ever had any moments where you regretted the life of a tennis player?
No, I never had a moment of regret. I had moments where I didn't like it. I had moments where I was homesick. But you know what? Then I went home. You know, my advantage was, I guess, that I didn't have a boss. My boss was the sport, and if I wanted to play, I could play tomorrow, next week. But if I got tired or lonely or injured, I want to be with my friends or girlfriend or wife, then I just did that. So yes, you have to explain it to the media why you're pulling out of a tournament, or you have to, you know, speak to your sponsor about it. But ultimately, if you're the number 1 player, number 5, number 10 player in the world, you make the decisions. So it was a pretty cool life.
Any more questions? Good. I'll go to the guy in the black scarf there.
Hello. You have talked a lot about the past and the present a bit. What is in it for your personal future in the next coming years?
A lot, I hope. You may know I'm turning 50 in about 5 weeks. And 50 for a man is you look back for the first time and you see what have you done. But at the same token, I want to look ahead and want to, you know, plan ahead what the future holds. Now, obviously, I can't play anymore, but the tennis business as such is very important to me. I was named the head of men's tennis in Germany just last month. So German tennis is very important to me. You know, the up-and-coming players, just to teach them what they need to do, speak to the coaches. You know, the tennis is changing. You asked me before, behind you, what happens with tennis when Roger and Rafa is no longer playing. So I'm on the advisory board of the ATP to help them find solutions for the younger players. So tennis as such has many different layers, and I you know, been part of it for 35 years. That'll be my professional future. Yeah.
So I think we've got 2 more questions. Yes, one from Boris's wife down here.
Just don't ask me the wrong questions now, please. Just don't ask me.
No, stick to tennis. If Novak calls tomorrow and he wants you back, do you say yes or no?
Okay, good question. Always the wife knows best, no? I must tell you that I would be flattered. I would be honored. I would fly to Monte Carlo. He has his green juice, and I have a beer. And I would tell him a no.
And one final question. Yes, from the person over there.
Obviously, you were very successful when you were young, at young age of 17. And I happen to be involved with lots of young teenagers today who aren't as motivated or passionate about anything. Just wanted to, if you would share your experience on how to, I don't know, ignite the passion in them rather than, or as parent, as teacher, as community, how can we foster that and bring it forward, maybe help the new generation?
I find it a very important question as a parent myself. I have 4 children between the ages of 23 and 7. And we all have all sorts of discussions, believe me. The main problem all 4 have is they've got too many options. On Monday it's this, and on Tuesday is that, and on Wednesday it's nothing, and on Thursday it's something completely different. So, we had a long discussion with my oldest. So when he was 16, I wanted him. He was good at tennis, but he was very good at basketball. So he lived in Miami, and he was scouted for the German national team in basketball under 16, and I was dreaming the first Becker in the NBA. I was dreaming. And then we had a discussion, and that meant for him to leave home in Miami and move to Frankfurt, and the consequences and all that. We spoke about living on the road, and he said, "Dad, can I talk to you?" And then we had a long discussion about the fact that that I was giving the choice by my parents what I wanted to do, as long I did it passionately, as long as it was something that I really loved doing. So he asked me, "Please give me that choice." And my choice is the arts, is music, is not sports. And of course I got teary-eyed. I said, "I've taught you to be a great son because you asked me the right question. Of course you have to follow your passion. Of course you have to follow your dream, but you have to finish. Don't come on Wednesday and said, I don't like it." So fast forward, 8 years forward, he has his own band, own successful music band. Funny enough, it's called the Bakery, which is Becker in English. But more importantly, he is a very successful artist with his own exhibitions now of painting that he sells all around Germany and parts of Europe. So, and he's a man. He lives the way he wants to live, and we are that close. So that's my answer.
And with that, very, very sadly, that is the end of the question and answer session. But there is still something more which we have to do. So at the end of this event, our committee has decided to extend to Boris an offer of honorary membership of the society, given his impact in tennis, but also beyond it in sport. So, and Boris has very happily accepted that offer. So I'm going to ask Paige, the president, to award that to him here. So if we can give him a round of applause. Thank you. And just before we go, a brief reminder of events coming up and a few other things. First of all, if you want to meet the speakers, so this is something which we're really trying to run out a lot more this term. So if you do want to meet any of the speakers on our term card, if you become members, please do look at the term card. There's an email address there. It's speakers@cus.org. That's my email. Send me a message if you're interested in meeting any of these people beforehand. I can't guarantee that their schedules will allow it, but if they do, we really want the members to be as involved as possible in that particular area. In terms of the events coming up later this week, our open period ends on Wednesday. So as I mentioned, Chelsea Handler on Wednesday, the debate on Tuesday, and also Simon Sharma on Tuesday. So what we're going to do now is Boris and I are going to go walk down the centre. So if you could let us and the team go first, with a big round of applause, if possible. Not for me, but for Boris. And thank you very much for being here. Thank you for being such a good audience. Thank you for that.